Hello, and thank you for joining us again today on another episode of the Dairy Signal. We're really excited to have you here and have our guest, Liz Griffith, with us today for another discussion about how employee management and managing feedback for yourself. So today we are excited about that conversation, but first we have a couple people to thank, including our sponsor for the month of February, Bremer Bank. They have decided to join along with us this February to support the Dairy Signal and providing this great information from us to you and making it as interactive as possible. In order for it to be interactive, you've got to participate, and that includes asking questions. And with our conversation today, I know people will have questions out there. So feel free to go to the right of this video and ask your questions if you're on a desktop computer, or if you're on a mobile phone, just scroll on down and you'll see it below the video that you're watching. Ask your questions, and we're excited to have you participate with us today if you're watching live. Well, as we move on, we've only got a few fun facts for the day. Today is known as National Cream Cheese Brownie Day. So if you're looking for a way to stay warm, stay inside, bake a little treat, and then cozy up and watch this today as you join us. And it's also National Umbrella Day. Now, if you ask me, it's a little bit early for umbrella season, at least here in the Midwest. Maybe a little bit down south, you might be experiencing some more rain. But right now, it is a little bit cold for that for us. But did you know that umbrellas were first invented over 4,000 years ago? And they were originally invented as a way to keep sun off of a person for shade, rather than the use of rain and sleet and snow, apparently, in today's day. But let's move on to our conversation today with Liz. So Liz Griffith is the Market Development and Human Resources Consultant with Encore Consultants. And we're going to have a great discussion on building a management team and how to receive and give feedback. So Liz, give us a little bit more of an introduction about yourself before we get started.
Okay, well, again, I'm Liz Griffith. I'm currently with Encore Consultants, and we work with businesses and many farm families throughout the United States and Canada. We help with everything from leadership and management to business growth and succession and transition planning. I was in dairy farming for over 25 years, but have always felt a connection to the people side of things. And that's kind of where my passion lies. So as much as I could do that through the years, I have done that to help friends, help other businesses, and help organizations like PDPW that I'm a part of. In addition, I still reside in Baldwin, Wisconsin, and I have 3 beautiful daughters who are all involved in the dairy industry as well.
Well, that's great, Liz. Thank you for being here today and bringing your knowledge and expertise on this subject. So with that, I think we can get started, and you can kick it off with a little bit of your presentation.
Okay, there's many parts of management, but today our focus is going to be on feedback, mostly about giving feedback, but also a little bit about receiving feedback. And I know it's one of those difficult things for everybody, but it certainly is a necessary tool to be utilizing in your businesses. I found it interesting to learn that only 6% of us are really good at giving feedback. That means 94% of us aren't so great. So hopefully some of the tips I share today will help you and at least get you a little more comfortable in trying to do it more often and also to receive it in a healthier manner, if you will. So just going to talk a little bit about what feedback is not. And feedback is not just what we say or how we say it. It's not just kind foo-foo words of praise. And it's not just creative criticism. So now you're all sitting there going, well, that's what we thought it is. What is it? Well, there's 2 kind of definitions for feedback. One is what we're most, familiar with, and that's the dialogue between people, which reflects how another person sees someone else's behavior or performance, right? We see them doing something good, we give praise and recognition. We see them doing something incorrectly or wrong, and we go in to correct it. But what we need to remember is that feedback is also the response from the receiver that informs the sender how the communication is being received in general. So that's a lot in there, but we have to remember that when we're giving feedback, if the person isn't ready to receive it, if something is telling you that they're not hearing you, then that feedback is essentially just wasted. It's not working. So even as, couples and families and business owners, we need to be receptive of how people are receiving the feedback. So a lot of you are going, okay, I know I should do this. It's important. But what are the benefits? How does it help me? How does it help my teams? Well, feedback, both, the corrective feedback and the praise type of feedback is crucial for a lot of issues. One, it can help improve employee performance, get people to be better at their job, learn more skills. It motivates your entire staff, right? They're excited that you are seeing what they're doing, even if it's maybe done incorrectly. You're willing to help them retrain. It gets them excited. It increases their job satisfaction because people want to feel appreciated and noticed. And that's something that feedback does. And when your employees are happier in their jobs, they increase productivity. And most importantly, and we hear this from a lot of employees, it's an opportunity to be heard. Because most of the time, we do not reach out to our team members and ask them questions or ask them their side of the story or even ask for their advice. So feedback is a tool that can give you all of these benefits. And that's pretty darn important when you're trying to improve the dynamics of your team and your management style. I thought this was really interesting, the Moravian Formula. It kind of goes back to the definition of how people receive feedback, which is very important to the definition of feedback. And 55% is based on your body language. So how you're standing, what you're doing with your arms, what you're doing with your facial expressions, right? Think of when we're disciplining our children, are we doing it in a nicer tone of voice with, maybe a hand on their shoulder, or are we standing there with our hands on our hips really angry? And 33% is your tone of voice. So again, even if you're giving corrective criticism, it's important that you try to maintain your tone of voice so you're not rising in anger. And only 7% is your words. So we always get caught up in what we're going to say. And in reality, that's the smallest piece of the puzzle. So again, just going back over this, pay attention to your body language. And also pay attention to the body language of the receiver. That's how you know they're engaged with the feedback. If they're looking away, if they're standing there with their arms crossed, if they're leaning back as if they're afraid, or even leaning too far in. And of course, look at their facial expressions. Do their eyes look like they're scared out of their shorts? Are they looking away and not trying to make eye contact with you? Are they looking down at the floor, really ashamed? And again, we talked about your tone of voice. That's really crucial. But also, when you're giving feedback, you really want to watch out for interruptions, right? There's a right place to do it. We're going to talk about that a little later. But your cell phone. If you're going to be giving feedback, you really need to put your cell phone on mute because that can really ruin the whole message. Excuse me, water break. So we're just going to talk about a little of these tips here when giving feedback. One is that, feedback should not be airbrushed or frosted over. It really needs to be genuine and done in a positive and encouraging way. And we talk about being specific. If you want that feedback, to be effective, it needs to be about the specific action or behavior that you're addressing. It also needs to be timely. Many of us will wait for an employee review to give feedback. Well, nobody really remembers 6 to 8 months or a year after what was good or what was bad. And when you see somebody doing something good or even doing something wrong, the best time to address it is then, not later. But be compassionate kind of goes back to your body language and your tone of voice. So we don't want to be giving it in a screaming, yelling way. Again, even if it's corrective feedback, we want, to hold our tongue and be, as the next one is, sincere. Be honest. Be genuine. The recipient needs to feel that you, as the boss or the manager, really believe what you're saying. So that's important. And again, for feedback to work in the way that it's supposed to work for all the benefits we talked about, feedback needs to be regular. You don't just do it once in a blue moon. If you want your team members, family members, spouse to really believe in the feedback you're giving, you have to give it on a regular basis. And I always like this one to ask questions. Again, it goes back to making sure that the receiver is understanding the message. So, you can ask for their help. You can ask them to explain things, but make sure you do ask questions because that lets you know that they heard the message. So we'll talk about a few more little feedback tips here. I do believe in this intensely, to give feedback after small victories, right? Many of us always want to wait for the big party, but you really want to, as they always say, catch them being good moments, right? Give that feedback when it's just something small that they've done because it means so much more. It's something simple that you saw and that you recognized. And a time not to give feedback is after a huge win. What do I mean by that? Well, maybe you're all done spreading manure, right? And you've emptied out the pits. You had no breakdowns. There was none spilled on the road. Like you're really excited and you want to tell everybody what a great job they did. It's not that you shouldn't, but that's more of a time of let's celebrate. This was awesome. The feedback should have been given, in those daily steps that, hey, you guys are doing a great job. Thanks for keeping the roads clean. So on the other side of that, we can talk about when really bad things happen, right? Maybe you did spill some manure on the road and the neighbors are all upset. Maybe equipment broke down because, you didn't have the right tools and parts in place, and so you didn't get the haylage made before the big rain. Well, everybody's already down and depressed, right? That's not the time to go, oh, you guys, this is what we should have did. We should have did this better, because they're already feeling that pain. So instead, just tell everybody, you know what? Let's just talk about this tomorrow. We'll put this on the sideline. Go get a good night's rest, and we'll all come back and talk about this as a group and see where, we could have made some different choices or maybe have a better plan for the next time. And of course, I talked about this one already a little bit, but never vent out your frustrations, right? While it might make you as the boss feel better to get your anger out and your worries and insecurities, it's going to make everyone else around you feel worse. So, and that creates resentment, and that's not good. So instead of, swearing and yelling, you could say something like, hey, I feel really frustrated right now, so I'm going to take a breather, and we're going to talk about this later. And the other important thing to do is listen. Get their side of the story. We can't always assume, especially when we're talking about corrective feedback, we can't assume that we know what happened. So listen to their side of the story. It makes them feel more appreciative. And most importantly, focus on the behavior and not the person. Because there could be some people that maybe they already give us a hard time all the time, and maybe we're not as close with them as we should be, but it's not about them, it's about the behavior, whether it's good or bad behavior. So instead of screaming, you're not reliable, this is the third day in a row you're late, talk about what's going on. You're usually on time. What's happening? And how can we fix it? So then we'll talk about, again, I found this information to be really interesting, and it's really condensing how to give feedback, but basics to good feedback. And the first one is always ask for a small yes. So what does that mean? Well, instead of going right into the feedback, say, hey, John, I'd really like to talk to you about, do you think at lunch we could meet? And most often than not, you're going to get the yes, right? That gives you both time to think about what we're going to talk about. They're going to be more open to talking because you've asked them for permission. Now, I know somebody out there is asking, well, what if they say no? Right? That could happen. And that's something as a manager or owner that you have to consider and kind of keep in the back of your mind and go, all right, if they're not even open to talking and feedback, is this the right person on the bus? Is this who I want on my team? The other simple step is, again, I alluded to it before, cut out the blur words. Don't frost over everything, especially if you're uncomfortable giving that corrective feedback. And so you're kind of going around in circles and you're muddling up the message. You want to get specific. Get to the point that you're there to talk about. And another one, especially when talking about corrective feedback, is you don't have to solve it all at once, right? You've provided some feedback. You've asked them questions and gotten their input. Maybe you create a plan and you check back in a day or two. And also after a conversation, people may have time to think about it and go, hey, I know a way I could fix this, or I know that maybe if I trained with Bob, maybe I'd have better results. And of course, end with a question. I keep bringing up, getting them to talk. So ending with a question, how does this make you feel? Do you feel we've come up with a good resolution? Even if it's positive feedback, you could say, hey, again, I'm so proud of the work you're doing. What can we do to even bring you up a step further, right? So again, it gets them involved. And the feedback is not just what you're saying. Again, it's how they're receiving it. So again, feedback is a tool that allows you to build that relationship, that rapport with your rapport with your employees. The more often you do it, like as I said, feedback should be regular. The more that they're going to have a tighter and respected relationship with you. And again, take time to understand their strengths and weaknesses, right? Because if you see the same issues happening over and over again, maybe that's a time to look at, maybe this isn't the position for them. Maybe they're having a hard time with the training procedures we're utilizing. So again, it's building that relationship. And overall, any type of communication, but especially feedback, builds trust, and improves the impact of the feedback. So the more often you do it, the more you embrace that relationship, that down the road, they're going to be appreciative, even if it's corrective feedback. So let's just turn the channel here. How do you, as a boss or manager, take feedback? Most of us don't want any, right? It's just about us leading and getting the job done, and we don't want to hear what we're doing wrong. But in order to really solidify those relationships, you have to be open to receiving feedback. So this might be a good time to kind of do a self-assessment of yourself and go, how would I act, or what would I say if somebody told me they didn't like the way I handled a situation? Think about it beforehand. Are you sensitive to that feedback? Is that going to make you angry or upset? Because it shouldn't. We all need that feedback. One of the tips I always like to say is, if you're really not sure how you feel about it at first, maybe just start a suggestion box and allow people to put comments in there. And then it gives you that time alone to read them, address them, think about them. But the most important thing is you have to demonstrate that you have the desire and understanding to change it, right? To do something different, to fix it. And once everybody gets comfortable with that and sees that, wow, even though I put it in the suggestion box, they listen to me. Maybe the next time I can go and talk to them directly. And every time that you get some type of feedback, go back, self-reflect, and think, what could I have done better? What could I have done different? How did I make that go so off course? You know, we're always learning, every one of us, so there's always opportunity for change. So that's kind of the points I wanted to talk about. I want to hear your questions and see if I can help you with some suggestions or tips.
Well, thank you, Liz. Yes, as you mentioned, we are all about taking questions here. That's what this is for, is to make sure that we provide you with the most valuable resources possible. And we are all open to taking questions. And with that, we do have some of them on Slido. And I'll start with the first one. It goes, if my boss is not open to feedback, how can I provide it without getting yelled at or fired?
And many of us are afraid of that, right? I mean, that's a very valid question. And again, I kind of go back to, you know, if you feel that that's the fear, by writing a nice, genuine letter is a good way to start. And, you know, it's kind of like, they call it the crap sandwich, you know, start out with something positive. Hey, I really like working here, but this is what I see happening or that you're doing that's making me feel, you know, this way. I would like the opportunity to talk to you about it. Or is there something we can do together to fix this? So I think that's a good, safe way to start if you're really not sure. And then it gives that person, by reading the letter, kind of what I said before, the time to think about it and go, you know, am I not approachable?
So say you are on the other side of that and you are the owner and you have all these wonderful employees, but you don't know how to take that feedback, a little bit like you were talking about earlier, but you're wanting to change and you're wanting to have that become something that's more implemented so you can have a better workplace environment. How do you change that feeling of, oh crap, I am getting all of this negative feedback, it's all coming at me, and not taking it so personal, but rather trying to think of it as bettering the business?
Right. And I hit it on the head there. Try not to take it as a personal attack. And maybe it could, you know, be the person who gave you the feedback didn't do it in the best way, right? So again, it's taking that time to reflect, walk away from the situation and say, hey, you know, I need to think about this. Let me come back to it. talk to, your spouse, talk to other owners and managers about it and say, all right, somebody is bringing up this issue. Maybe I am doing something wrong. Who can help me change this? Who can help me at least make a step in the right direction? And it's hard. It's not easy, but we have to do it. And that's why the walking away and taking some time to reflect is important. But on the other hand, doing nothing and blowing it off like it never happened is even worse. Because again, you're losing the respect of your employees or your team members. And in their mind, they're going, well, that was a waste of my time. I shared info and all he did was get mad and walk away.
So say that does happen. Say you do get mad and heated in the moment and you do walk away. How do you reapproach that employee who brought that up to you in a way where they're not going to feel attacked, and try and show that you did understand, but it takes time to change some of our old habits?
Excellent point. There again, I would go back to the first step about asking for the yes, right? Go to that employee and say, I want to talk to you about our conversation and my reaction. I've had time to think about it. Could we set up a time to chat? So first and foremost, that gives you both the time to think about it. It gives the employee time to go, okay, you heard what I said. He's thought about it. This could be good. And then, of course, it's always important to just admit our faults, right? Open and honest. So you get in that meeting and you say, hey, I'm sorry. That was really hard for me to take. But after thinking about it, I see where you're coming from. I'm looking for ways to take a step in the right direction. Maybe with you and some other team members, we can work out some solutions or, to bring them in on it. That's great. If you don't want to, that's okay too. But at least do that apology and show them that you are making the effort to change, to do something different.
So say you got that letter, you read it, and it was something that you personally need to change, or, something that doesn't happen on a flip of a dime that can change. How do you address that when it's in an anonymous letter that you are trying to make those changes, but you don't know how to go about it so that they know they're being heard, especially since it did come in a letter form?
Sure. And you want to keep it, if at that point anonymity is what you have to do, you want to keep it that. You don't want to hunt down the person and go, who said that? I need to know. I think the best way is to first kind of come up with your own couple of steps. What am I going to do to change this? Or what should I do? And then, of course, I encourage meetings. So if you have some type of employee or team meeting or leadership meeting, you could bring it up in a very nonchalant way, not trying to put somebody on the spot and make them feel uncomfortable, but, just admit, hey, I have heard that I am doing this and it's not making you feel good. I'm working on changing that. And I hope, over the next course of whatever, if it's weeks or months, you're going to see that change in me. So again, open, honest, sincere.
Okay. And kind of going back to the start of the feedback chain, how often do you need to give feedback? What is an appropriate amount of time to have, feedback be given? Even if it is, like you said, it's not every 6 months when you have those employee reviews, but what is a good amount of time for both positive and maybe negative feedback?
I don't know if there's a golden time, to say every 3 weeks, I'm going to give feedback. I think it's really important, when we said timeliness, right, that you're not waiting. So when you see it, you give it. If someone is doing an excellent job, don't just walk by the parlor and yell, hey, good job. Stop for a few seconds. It doesn't have to be long feedback, but just stop, shake their hand, pat them on the back, thanks, you're doing a great job. That's feedback. On the other side, if you see someone, maybe they didn't post dip all the cows, right? And you saw it. and you're like just yelling something. That's feedback, but it's not the right feedback. Stop right then and there, give the instructions on how we do this, why we do this, and, just let them know that, hey, if you need help, you have questions, we're here to help you. So again, back to how often, I don't think there's a magic number. You just always need to be aware and be looking, whether it's corrective or positive feedback. People need it. Think back again to your families, your relationships, right? We want to be wanted. We want to be recognized. We all like that positive or even corrective information.
So we have another question here on Slido, and it reads, if an employee is doing something very wrong and has not been corrected, how do I handle this? And I'm assuming with this question, they're saying that they've been, they've talked to this employee before about handling the situation differently. But what can they do after having that, feedback is given, but looking to still have that issue?
Yep, I kind of figured that question was going to come up. And that's where it really then gets deeper, right? It's going into what protocols or rules do you have set up as a business? Is there a verbal warning, a written warning? Do you just fire on the spot? I mean, a lot of that comes into play here, because if you have given them corrective feedback, you have together worked out a plan on how it won't happen again. Maybe it was some refresher training, maybe it was a buddy system or promises, right? At that point, if it's still happening, you can either have that be your last, hey, we're going to meet and talk about this. If I don't see change in the next week, 2 weeks, whatever your parameters are, then, I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to have you here or not have you in this position. So it really goes back to your policies on that.
Okay. And then we have the question that goes, what if I'm uncomfortable giving feedback?
And obviously most of us are. That's why only 6% are good at it, right? So, that's common. And I think the more you do it, the easier it's going to be. So if you're just starting out, start with the small stuff, right? Just get comfortable with it. Kind of think in your mind, rather than I'm giving constructive, corrective feedback, think of it as I'm just training them, so you kind of just get in that comfortable mode. A lot of us aren't comfortable even just saying good job, but maybe you put some sticky notes on your desk in the morning or on your steering wheel and just remind yourself, today's the day. I've got to tell 2 people that they're doing something great here or that I appreciate them. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get.
And with that, when learning to give feedback and trying to find that nice sweet spot, especially, wanting to make sure that they're giving enough good feedback, is there a point where negative feedback becomes too much, too often, that it needs to be balanced out with that good feedback again? Is there a nice golden rule with that, or is that something that needs to be worked out with each person dependently?
You can look at it 2 ways. I could sit here and tell you it should be 50-50, right? But a lot also depends on the person, their personality, and what they are doing. I mean, if they're constantly always doing something wrong and not following what you have trained them to do or not following the rules your business has set forth, I go back to the whole thing that maybe they're not the right person on your bus, right? They maybe shouldn't be on their team, because if others see that this person constantly does wrong, and yes, constantly gets constructive, corrective feedback, he doesn't change and he's still here. What's that saying to the rest of the team? That that's okay and it all means nothing. So, I hope I'm answering that correctly, but there's a lot more pieces to that. And don't be afraid to set time limits. When I talked a little bit ago about, we're going to check back in a week or 2 weeks, set some goals together, set some parameters, and then be sure that you do follow those and check back. And if there isn't progress, that's a whole nother decision.
It goes back to the last time you were on, and as you said, that are they the right person for having that seat on the bus? So that is a great reminder that sometimes not everybody's the right fit for the position that they're in, and it's okay to have those conversations if needed. We have another question here on Slido that goes, what if I don't agree with someone, meaning they think an employee is doing great, but I think otherwise? How do you address that?
So I'm assuming that's an employee. Right, okay, I'm going to assume that.
Assuming so.
Yep, okay. So then that person really needs to set up a feedback meeting with the manager. And it could just be the manager, when I said get the whole story, listen, ask questions, maybe he or she didn't. So that's an opportunity to just say, hey, can we schedule a time to talk? I want to talk about this person. You meet, and again, you don't want to just do it in a completely derogatory way, but you want to state the facts and you want to state what you're seeing. And as an employee, it's frustrating you. And then again, work to resolve it together. How can I help change this? How can, what can we do together as a team? Or how can I help you as the boss to make sure that these corrective actions truly happen with regard to this employee?
So say that it is an employee, like in this situation that we just went through, where it's an employee giving feedback to a manager or the boss about another person, but this is something that they are constantly coming to you about, and it's not always about one person and maybe about a whole other list of people, but they're kind of in that schoolyard tattletaling, for example, in every little thing. How do you address that with the employee who's always coming to you with everybody else's problems? Because at a certain point, they're not always looking in the mirror and making sure that they're doing what's best, and maybe overstepping some boundaries. How does that go?
Right. Yeah, and you see that quite often. There's always that one person. I like your analogy with the schoolyard. So the tattletale. And again, as the manager, you're going to know that, right? This person comes to me every single week, with trash talk about somebody. So that's where, as the manager, maybe you need to go over some guidelines and protocols with that person on what you're willing to hear about, and then put the focus really back on them and their role. So let's look at you, John. What are you accomplishing? Do you, how is this affecting you? And really try to put it back on them. And again, I'm going to go back that if it still constantly happens, even if that person's just telling you, the other team members know it, right? And so that's creating a conflict. And maybe that's not the type of person you want in the team nest there.
So say we build off this part a little bit more and see that everybody on the team knows, and you were able to address the issue with the one person who was always coming to you with the trash talk. And you're trying to get everybody back on board, back in a well-managed team that has positivity in it rather than negativity. How would you go about that without calling people out, without making it a pointing finger match, but trying to bring everybody back together in a positive way?
It's a good way to think on that. To me, it would be, you're trying to bring positivity back. So you focus on that. And, whether it's just little milker meetings or, small team meetings, you kind of set the stage. Like, here's what we know has been happening. We want to move beyond this, and we want to get to a place where we work well together. So maybe you make a few suggestions. Here's what we're going to do going forward. When you have meetings, focus on the positive and the corrective measures as a group rather than pinpointing someone out in the group. Even if it's just one person who maybe consistently uses a dirty towel, you could say, hey, as a team, we've seen this happening. It's, hurting our somatic cell. Let's refocus on some of these protocols. That way you're not just pointing fingers, and you're showing them that you want this to be a team where we work together, both the positives and the negatives.
That's some great advice. We are going to go back to some of our questions from Slido, and we have one that goes, how can I not use blur words and yet not hurt the other person's feelings?
So I've been told I use a lot of blur words because I'm that softie, right? That's my personality. And I've seen from my own personal experience where that has hurt the feedback because I really didn't get to the point. So then they were really unsure. So again, if you've committed to a time, that gives you time to think about it. Write yourself some notes before you even talk. This is the thing I want to focus on, right? This is the specific topic. So it's best just to get right to that in your first sentence. And that way you alleviate all the extra talk before that's just confusing the message.
Okay. And let's go talk, say we're in this situation and we are going to talk about the body language. You said that that is the majority of what a person reads or sees when they're interacting with another person. And you are starting to recognize after the fact that your body language might not be the best and it might not portray, that conversation that you want to have. How do you address it when you're in the situation, or how do you go about fixing that? So next time you're in a meeting and you're getting some negative feedback, or you're providing that positive or possibly providing that negative feedback. So it's something that you're thinking about, so it's not conveying the wrong message.
Those stress balls? Maybe you hang on to one of those. Again, it's learned behavior, so it's going to take time. It's not going to just change overnight. But I like to watch other people and watch their body language, watch their facial expressions, because when you watch others, right away, like if you're listening to someone talk and you get comfortable, you're like, oh, it's because their body language and their tone of voice is making me comfortable. And when you see someone who, they're just standing like this and they have that gruff look on their face, it automatically makes you feel uncomfortable. So always be watching people, not just at the farm, anywhere. And it's got to give you some of those tips. But again, if it's going to be a situation where you're going to hear negative feedback, it's learned. You just got to think about it. You got to tell yourself, relax and listen. Ask questions. Relax, re-listen, listen, and ask questions.
So say you are trying to do that, but you're going about it where you're asking for that small yes from an employee, say, and you're the manager. And that small yes is causing a lot of anxiety because you're saying, hey, let's meet at noon to discuss X, Y, or Z. And that employee builds up the anxiety, starts, getting a little bit more defensive beforehand. Is there any way to go about that can help lessen the anxiety on the employee and or make sure that it's a good conversation because they do know about that meeting ahead of time, and it might not always have that positive feedback that we are trying to give?
Right. Yeah, because most of the times it's probably corrective feedback when you're asking for a meeting, right? I think it's just about at the time you're even doing the ask to, like I say, get to the point, be specific, but watch your tone of voice and just say, this is something I'd like to talk to you about. I want to learn how together we can correct this. So you're kind of being open, and everything about how you say it is going to depict how they react. So if you go in the parlor and you're like, hey, we're meeting at noon and we're going to talk about this. Well, instantly they're nervous, right? They're afraid. So it's about keeping calm. And if you can't do it at that point, if you feel, your temper, whatever, don't do anything right then. Walk away. Give yourself an hour, 2 hours, then come back and say, hey, John, I really would like a time to talk to you about what I saw in the parlor. I think together we can work out a solution, and I just want us to have some one-on-one time to discuss it and hear your side of the story.
Okay, that is good information to take back if you're needing it. And we have a question specifically in regards to families on the farm. And the question reads, does your method work with family members like my dad? I'm 45 and running the daily operation, but dad is semi-retired and sometimes he mucks things up.
He mucks things up. So meaning, I just want to make sure I understand that. The relationship between the two of them, is that how you would take that?
Yes, that's how I'm taking it.
Okay. So there again, it's how you would do anything else. You got to go for the ask, right? Hey, Dad, off the farm, I'm wondering if I can meet you for coffee, and I just want to talk to you about and be specific. Get his answer. By getting him committed, and most often they're going to, sure, I'll talk to you about it. He still may be mad at the time, but, and then just have your points ready. And again, listen to their side of the story as well, but make sure that you're being specific about what you wanted to share, your feelings. And if you feel that at the time the relationship isn't, or the conversation isn't progressing the way you'd like, feel free to say, you know what, let's table this. Let's meet again on Wednesday and talk about it again. You're addressing learned behaviors, right? This is your dad who's, I can't remember what you said, 65 years old. This is how he's been all the time. You're not going to change him overnight. So it may be a work in progress of conversations, but I think if you're consistent and you're honest and you share and you listen, after a while, they're going to be a little more receptive to what you're saying.
So what would you do if in that situation, the parent, say the dad in this one, was not receptive and just kind of stuck in the ways, I guess you could say? How do you go about that, especially if you're somebody who might be younger and trying to continually improve the operation in a way that the father may not understand or agree with?
It's a good point too. And we see that a lot in business growth, right? As the next generation comes in, we're not all on the same page, and for different reasons, maybe the way we're raised, different cultures, etc. At that point, that might be the time to think about bringing in, a consultant or a mediator to even help the conversation move along. Because with family, we're used to it. We know we want change, so it's harder for us to implement the change. But if you bring in a third party to kind of help the conversation move forward and refocus on, the changing values, the changing culture, that's probably the best path to go in that situation.
So we have a couple other questions here, and they read, should I ask my employees how they feel about their managers? Is that going to stir up trouble, or is that something that is actually advised to help continue and making sure improvements are happening when needed?
I 100% agree with that. You could use it, a survey where they don't even have to say their names. You could do it in private one-on-one, meetings. I kind of like the more generic approach because then nobody's singled out. But you can't change and you can't grow and you can't develop if you don't have the information you need. And it also helps you determine, do I have people, again, in the right seats on the bus? If you're constantly getting complaints about one person who's being more of a dictator manager rather than, a manager who's there working side by side and teaching and guiding, You need to know that, or you're going to not have the same employee satisfaction and retention. So I am a huge proponent of that. And, I can't tell you which mechanism to use. That's based on, your farm and your teams, what you think would be the most receptive.
So let's talk about that employee aspect. And if you're the manager or the owner and you are trying to provide feedback, either positive or, trying to make some improvements, but they speak a different language. We have a lot of Spanish speaking employees within the industry, but you don't have the best skills to communicate that to the employee. What is a good way to go about that? So that they know that they are either being heard, listened to, or need to make a change.
Right. Language is huge for many of us. If you can, learn a little bit of Spanish, right? It's not hard to learn some of the easy words such as good job and thank you, right? So that's something you can do on your own and be able to give that feedback at any time. When it's something, deeper, if you will, or is going to take more words, don't be afraid to, get somebody involved that could be a translator. I always caution, if you have that one person on the farm who speaks both English and Spanish, that may or may not be the person to use at this time, just because you want to make sure that your message gets received and you want to make sure that you're hearing them correctly. There's also different, translation tools. You could print it, translate it, print it out, and speak from that. The caution there is that you're not going to be ready to always hear what they say. Now, that being said, there's some great apps out there that will instantly translate on your phone when you speak into it. Caution is it may not have every dairy word we need. So yeah, you have to think about that. Now, again, if it's just good feedback, using that on-farm person is great. If it's corrective, but maybe you're just not sure about that translator on the farm, that's where you may consider bringing someone else in.
That is good to know that there's always those options if need be in those situations. So we have a question here and it goes, how can I ask for feedback to see how I am doing? That can always, be a little bit tricky to bring up, but how do you go about that with your employees or your managers?
Yep. Great point, right? We don't want to know, I said, how we're doing, right? It goes back to even our family and spouses. Am I good enough? Am I doing this right? Am I writing my letters perfectly? Don't be shy to ask for feedback. But again, don't do it at a time when they're just about to jump in the tractor or head to a big meeting. You have to time that properly so the person can truly digest the message, that you're giving. And I think it's important. So I don't think it hurts to ask for it. But again, be specific, be positive, and be sincere. Don't do it in an accusatory manner. Hey, you never give me feedback. I need some. That's not going to get you good feedback. So set up that time and just say it's something you want to know how you're doing. You want to know if there's things you should be working on. Maybe you're a wonderful employee and you just want to know, how can I, take the next step? What roles can I reach for?
Yes, and that goes for both, the employees and the managers. It's important to ask for that if needed. And we have another one that reads, what if I'm in a bad mood or not having a good day? How does that impact my employees, especially when giving and receiving that feedback? What do you do in those situations?
If you're in a bad mood, probably don't give it that day because your message isn't going to come out the way you want, and it's probably not going to be received well. So that might be the day you just skip it. It kind of goes back to when I said you see something really bad happening and your initial response is to yell and correct it. And I'm saying just step away for a second. Not the best time to give it. Even if you're seeing somebody doing something really great, but you're in a bad mood, so it's not going to come off really sincere, wait till the next day.
That is some good advice. And so I think that was the last question that I see on here. And it's actually a great wrapping up point with where we're at on time. But Liz, is there a couple key takeaway points that we either as employees or managers and owners can take from today's conversation that we can be looking to implement maybe this week or in the short future?
Well, as we said, feedback is important for both us as the receivers as well as the people, giving the feedback. So if you're not doing it yet, set a goal for yourself. I'm going to do 3 pieces of feedback this week, 2 pieces, whatever, and just start working up to that. But make sure you keep those tips in mind, that you ask for the yes, especially if it's corrective feedback, and you're sincere and you stay on topic.
Well, that is some great advice. And we have to say thank you so much for joining us. We had such a great discussion and a lot of questions come in. So I know this was really well received by those listening, and hopefully they can take away some of this feedback advice and implement it on their farm or business. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I also want to say a big thank you to Bremer Bank for being our sponsor this month on the Dairy Signal. We really appreciate their support. And like I said earlier, in making sure that this information can get to you in a timely manner in which it's important to implement and work on either building, changing, or looking towards the future. I also have to say thank you to our national sponsors. They have been with us all year, and we're looking forward to having them be with us this year as we have our programs and look forward to business conference here in March. If you're looking to learn more about our partners, feel free to head to PDPW Prime, where they're all listed and have either show specials or they have some great information on how you can get in touch with them if you're looking for certain services, products, or even just possibly inquiries. So with that, I have to say thank you again, Liz. And thank you to everybody watching. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. And we look forward to having you back tomorrow, where we have Dan Bossy back talking about markets. So have a great rest of your day and see you tomorrow.